can see this now. So we're going to talk about conservation planning, kind of an overview of that. Just the arrows, or
you can just click on that. It'll link here on this side, right? Isn't there? You go. There you go.
All right. The Louisiana Master Farmer Program, it's sponsored. We're going to talk about NRCS, the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, an overview of the planning and implementation, and some conservation programs that are available. Who are we? The NRCS history. In the 1930s, during the Dust Bowl days, windstorm, crossed the Great Plains and swept soil particles, across the nation. And those soil particles went as far as Washington, D.C., and Congress decided action must be taken immediately. Okay, what has happened here? So in 1935, the Soil Conservation Service, now which is NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, was established on April 27, 1935. And then on February the 27th, 1937, President Roosevelt urged governors to enact the conservation district laws, or the Soil and Water Conservation District Formations began, or SWCSs. How many of you have noticed a lot of times when you may go from one parish into another one, you may see a sign that says entering or leaving so-and-so Soil and Water Conservation District? Well, that's kind of what we're talking about here. And the conservation program is a link with the local, state, and federal and private corporations in all the conservation and natural resource projects. They're a local unit of government. They're established by residents, landowners, governed by a board of 5 supervisors. The roles of the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, they represent, the local people to meet the resource concerns. They oversee employees and provide a lot of employees to NRCS or help NRCS on conservation planning. They approve the conservation plans and help get additional dollars and equipment, to help install some conservation practices. So let's talk a little bit about a conservation plan now. Talk a little bit about the Soil and Water Conservation Districts and the Soil and Water Conservation Program. Let's talk a little bit about a resource management system plan, a conservation plan. You can see that it's a voluntary plan. It's a plan that is developed between you and NRCS to help control any issues or resource concerns that might be on your farm. The previous speaker talked about, several of the conservation practices, that could be part of a conservation plan. Some of the things that we look at, when we're developing this plan is we like to say SWAPA plus H plus E. SWAPA is soil, water, air, plant, and animals. And H is the human side of it. And a few years back, we included energy into the conservation plans. So if you hear me today say SWAPA, soil, water, air, plant, and animals, plus human, plus the energy, side of it. The goal of a conservation plan is to implement this plan, to fully implement the resource management system level plan to address all the concerns that may be on the farm. And this is just a copy of a plan. This is one that we put together to give an example. This particular individual was doing some crop rotation in some fields, was also planting some cover crop in some fields, and was putting down an underground pipeline or irrigation water conveyance pipeline. That's just part of a plan, but it may be part of it. When we visit with you on your farm or on your area that you own or the area that you're leasing or whatever, we kind of go through a planning process with you. This planning process is something we do every day in our own life. All of us do it in some form or fashion. But one of the first things we want to know is to identify the resource concerns or the problems. I hate to say problems, but or resource concerns. and determine your objectives. If I'm working with you on a plan and I'm talking to you about planting pine trees, and you're saying, I don't want trees planted, I want to grow a row crop, or I want to grow rice, or I want to grow grass for livestock or whatever, well, I'm not meeting your objectives. You determine your objectives, and then we'll try to help you meet those objectives. As we're working with this plan, we're going to help you inventory the resources. Help you look at the soils, help you look at any other things that may be there. We're going to offer you, we're going to analyze, these resources and see, and then formulate an alternative to you. Something may present several alternatives to you. We may present alternative 1 to you. This is one way of doing it. An alternative 2 is another way of doing it, and so forth and so forth. Of course, we've evaluated those alternatives because we want to make sure that we're meeting your objectives. We want to make sure that we're addressing the resource concerns that have been identified. After we do all that, you may say, well, Steve, you offered me, excuse me, you offered me alternative A, which was going to cost this much money, alternative B, which is going to cost 3 times the money that alternative A was going to do, and then alternative C was going to cost about the same as alternative A. So I've decided that I'm going to do, you say, well, I think I want to do alternative A. So you just made a decision telling us which one of these alternatives that you want to complete. So once you do that, we develop the plan and you begin to implement that plan. And then once the plan is implemented, we'll do an evaluation of the results. One thing we want to look at is we identified the problems. Did we help correct those issues? Did we meet your objective as the landowner or the land user or the operator of the farm? But keep in mind, any of these steps in this planning process, we can stop and go and start over again if we need to, if for some reason things change. The critical steps is the first ones that we talked about. And then step 4 was analyzing the resource data, and step 5 was formulating the alternatives. I talked a little bit about those earlier, the alternative A, alternative B, and so forth. Some of the things we're going to look at, and the previous speaker touched on it, did a very good job of discussing this, but we have some programs or computer programs that we use. If you have sheet and reel erosion or erosion occurring on your farm, it may be where it's just kind of eroding off, the farm, and you see the sediment channels in the ditches at the lower end of the field, or where soil is deposited at the lower end of the field. We have a program or a model that we call the Revised Universal Soil Loss Equation, or RUSLE, commonly call it Russell. And Russell 2 model is a computer model that we plug in some information, and it tells us how much soil is eroding off that field. Now, you may also have some gullies out there, some ephemeral gullies, and we can help you address those issues too. How healthy is your soil? That's something that we can work with you about. Previous speaker touched on that too. But the Russell 2 will also help us identify, what may need to be done to improve the health of your soil. And any contaminants, nutrients, salts, heavy metals, and pesticides, can all be part of this and helping you to address those issues if they exist. Some of our concerns may be water quantity and quality. Do you have too much water, or do you not have enough? And if you do have water, is it suitable for human, animal, or for recreation? So that's things that we'll talk to you about, to see if there's issues that you might want to do to help address those. Suspended solids and turbidity. Is this an issue? You know, there's water coming through that grade stave structure or through that pipe, you know, going into, you know, coming out of the field, going into that channel. You know, it has some sediment in it. You can see that water coming out of that pipe is a little brown, isn't it? So there may be some suspended solids or oh, I can't talk here. You know, so water coming through that pipe, you know, carrying some soil off the field. You may have some issues where there's some excessive nutrients. You know, this was discussed by the previous speaker, you know, causing some algae blooms, and which may cause, you know, some water quality issues. You may have issues where, you know, animals are grazing in the creek or in the pond or in the bayou or whatever. You know, you may want to think about, you know, do I really need to let these animals go into that creek or into that bayou or into that water body? I'll just say it that way. There may be some things that you can do, some conservation measures that you could do to help prevent the animals from there. And you may say, well, Steve, that's the only source of water for my cows. And you're talking about fencing them out or doing something to keep them out, to exclude them from the water body. Well, if that's true, then if that's your only source of water, there may be some other conservation practices you could do to provide water, such as, you know, a watering facility, commonly called a water trough. You might be able to, you know, have to put down a well or you know, some underground pipeline, you know, to that watering facility. You may want to think about putting some, we call it heavy use area protection or rock pads, certain types of rock, you know, around, you know, help protect it. How many of you can think about your neighbors that have a water trough that is it's a big mud hole around it? You get a calf that's there that can't drink out of the trough because they can't get their head, you know, over in the trough because it's, you know, muddy around the trough and it's hard for them to get to. So there's some issues there. Air resource concerns, you know, possible air concerns, particulate matter, you know, burning, chemical drift, you know, greenhouse gases, you know, ammonia and odor and others. You know, these are some things to think about. Smoke problem. You know, there may be some issues here, you know, where you may have, you know, some safety issues. I can remember several years back, I was driving down the road and there was a vehicle in front of me, and smoke came across the road, and this was a major highway, and that vehicle in front of me disappeared. You know, the smoke just came in and I could not see the vehicle in front of me. There was no problems there. You know, vehicle didn't stop or anything, it kept going, but I lost sight of that vehicle, so there was some safety concerns there. So things you want to think about. Chemical drift, you know, is the product you're putting out. You want to just make sure you're following the label guidelines. You know, we have a program that's called Windows Pesticide Screening Tool. NRCS is not going to tell you that, you know, you can't put out this pesticide or whatever, but we're here to say, using that Windows Pesticide Screening Tool, that if you use that pesticide on these conditions, these are some issues that you want to, you know, think about. You may have to do some other things to help mitigate or overcome those issues. Plant conditions is a resource concern when productivity and the quality fails to meet your expectations. You know, quality criteria is met when it's suitable to the site, does not negatively impact other resource concerns, yields at least 75% of the site potential. We show you a few examples here. This is a field that's been planted, a crop field that was planted and had a severe erosion problem on it. Remember I was talking earlier about Russell 2, talking about sheet and rill erosion. You can see where there was a lot of soil moving here. And so what we would do is work with you to try to do some conservation measures to keep that soil in place and not have it, eroding off the field. Here's another site on another operation where you can see some grass, but it's not really growing that well. It may not be adapted for the site. The site may be a little too wet. There may be some other things you need to do. So we can help you address, those resource concerns also. Animal resource concerns is available and quality of the food and water and cover, for fish and wildlife and domesticated livestock. Obviously, that is an animal concern. If you have, some issues on the farm, maybe there's some things from conservation, the conservation plan can help you address, from a livestock operation. But you can also have some animal concerns, for wildlife too. You may say, Steve, I like to, turkey hunt, or I like to see turkeys, or Steve, I like to duck hunt, or, see waterfowl or whatever. So there's some things in that conservation plan that we can work with you on to help you address, those issues. Of course, everything we do, there's rules and regulations that we have to go by, and one is the National Environmental Policy Act compliance. And the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969 was actually enacted in 1970, established the national policy promoting the enhancement of the environment. The purpose is to ensure that environmental factors are weighed when compared to other factors in the decision-making process undertaken by federal agencies. The Act established the environmental policy, including a multidisciplinary approach to considering environmental effects. And this is just the form that we use. We will fill this form out to document our findings. The Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act has been around since the 1970s. It's a law that was enacted that regulates airborne contaminants that are known as hazardous to human health. We want to make sure that we have, addressing that. The Clean Water Act is the Federal Water Pollution Act, Control Act of 1972. It's a regulation of activities which impact waters of the United States, including all surface waters, such as navigable waters and their tributaries, interstate waters, their tributaries, and most natural lakes, wetlands adjacent to these waters, and impoundments of these waters. So we'll talk about the Clean Water Act. Cultural resources. What do you think a cultural resource is? Historic districts, sites, buildings, structures, or objects listed in or eligible for listing on the national list of historic places. Native American sites and things like this. Threatened and endangered species. What is a threatened and endangered? It's a federally listed species. Species proposed for listing, and state species of concerns. So that's things that we want to make sure. Here's a picture of an animal that was on the list, but I think may not be on the list now. Migratory birds. How many of them like to, duck hunt, or waterfowl, observe waterfowl. So we're talking about that. And not just waterfowl, but other birds. Invasive species, we want to work with you to, if you have invasive species on the farm or on the place, maybe offer ways of trying to control that. And here's just a shot of a Chinese tala, which is, could be considered as an invasive species. Riparian areas. What is a riparian area? It's an ecological system that occurs along a water course or a water body. Each one is kind of different. They're not all the same, but they have some similarities. Here is an area right in here. There's a creek bayou or whatever running here, and is coming in and planting, trees or grasses, next to that to kind of give you a little bit more protection and provide some habitat for waterfowl and our upland wildlife. Wetlands is an area, that contains hydric soils, hydrophytic vegetation, and an indication of wetland hydrology. If you have wetlands on the farm, try to help you protect those areas. Just a picture, of a wetland area there. And this slide is showing several things. You can see the little body of water right there on the right side of the slide. That is a small little wetland area that somebody may want to think about. You may want to think about coming in. Filter strips we're talking about earlier, were mentioned earlier, coming in and putting a filter strip in, right adjacent to that area to help try to protect, that wetland area. Planting that filter strip or field border, to grasses, or if the person is wanting to plant it to trees. We talked about repairing buffers earlier, so maybe planting that area to some trees, not the whole field, but just parts of it. Visit your local NRCS or your Soil and Water Conservation District office. Right now, with the health issues that are going on, I would suggest that you call the office first and kind of set up before you just go visit right now, because a lot of the offices are not open right now. But when the field office, when we come out to work with you on your farm to help you develop the plan, items we typically request from you is, do you have a soil test, a soils analysis? What nutrients are you applying? Kind of have a site of the area, a map showing the area, and by fields. Field 1 is cropland for 100 acres. Field 2 is pasture land for 50 acres, and so forth. Farm, records that list for each of the rotation, crop rotation. Your pesticide applications, your crop yields. If it's a grazing operation, your grazing records. Here's a copy of a soils test. It has a little bit of age to it. They've changed a little bit, but this is a copy of a soils test here that a person, had completed on their farm. Had a pH value of 4.95, which is real low, real acid. The recommendation, it looked like they were trying to establish Bahia grass, was to put out 80 to 120 pounds of actual nitrogen to the acre, to put out about 140 pounds of phosphate and about 140 pounds of potash to the acre. And also here, because that pH was 4.95, it was recommended that a ton of lime be applied, and that ton of lime would raise the pH from 4.95 to 5.47. Very important to know what the pH level of your soil is. We'll schedule a field visit with you on your farm, to ride across your farm or to walk across your farm, with you, and to look at any resource concerns that you may feel like you have, and we may offer some suggestions on how to fix them. There may be some follow-up questions, that we'll have with you to answer some questions we have, but we will follow up with you. And then once you and the conservation planner have made a decision on which practices to be installed, the conservation plan can be prepared and financial assistance options can be discussed. You know, remember what you said earlier, this plan is a volunteer plan. It's a plan that you've requested. We'll come out, work with you on it, and help you implement that plan. It's your plan. Please, if you have questions, ask while the plan is being developed or while you're implementing that plan. And once all the items or all the practices are complete, your plan is considered fully implemented for the phase 3 of the Master Farmer Program. Now, keep in mind this plan, we may help you develop this plan for practice A, practice B, and practice C. But when you get started and halfway through it, you say, well, I've changed my mind. I don't want to do this. I want to do something else. And so the plan can be modified, can be changed. It's not something that you write and has to be this way forever. It can be modified. So if you want to change, if things happen and you need to change, that plan can be changed. Don't hesitate to contact your local NRCS office. Conservation programs, going to touch on these for just a few minutes. The Food Security Act, the 1985 Food Security Act, it's been around since December 23rd, 1985. It enacted some rules that if you had highly erodible lands, there's certain things you had to do, to stay in compliance with that. We talked a little bit about wetlands a while ago, and the swamp buster part of that is that. And then also there was a program that is administered by a sister USDA agency, the Farm Service Agency, but that program is called the Conservation Reserve Program, a CRP. Some of you may have land in it now. In 1990, the 1990 Farm Bill was passed, and the Wetlands Reserve Program, a WRP program, came along, and it's a program designed to establish areas back to wetlands. In 1996, the Farm Bill created the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, or EQIP. It's a program that's still here today. That program is still going on. You can get some financial assistance to implement that conservation plan that we talked about. The Wildlife Habitat Incentive Program has kind of been merged in, with the EQIP program now. But in 2002, the Conservation Security Program came along. Now, it is a program designed to help you achieve certain levels of conservation. And then in 2008, the Conservation Stewardship Program came along that kind of replaced the Conservation Security Program. But both the Conservation Security Program and the Conservation Stewardship Program are there to help you achieve certain levels of conservation. You may be at a certain level and you say, well, I want to get to the next step up. So these two programs can help you do that. The regional, in 2014, the Farm Bill created the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP program, and it is here to help you implement some different measures also. If you have questions, you can contact your local NRCS office, your local conservation district office, or these websites at www.nrcs.usda.gov is the national homepage site, and the www.la.nrcs.usda.gov is the Louisiana NRCS site. And I believe that is it, unless somebody has any questions.
Thank you, Steve. I believe, James, did